It's very important that my argument is not that things are meaningful, we want to live on just because they can be lost. That wouldn't make any sense, because then like everything would be meaningful just because everything can be lost. You know, that's not the claim. The claim is, of course, if I'm committed to sustaining something, it's because I take it to be intrinsically valuable. I take it to be an end in itself. It's a qualitative question that like I want this to not just live on but flourish. You know, and I have reasons for why I take it to be a good life to lead. You know, so the claim is just that like intrinsic to that is the sense of fragility and finitude, that, you know, it is something that has to be sustained, can be lost, etc. But that sense of finitude and fragility is not by itself. It's a necessary but not sufficient condition for something being meaningful. Otherwise, it would be easy to lead a meaningful life. All I have to do is to feel threatened. But of course, like, no, it requires, and these are the two moves of second affair. I have to take something as a good in itself, as something that is like worth being devoted to. And I have to understand that something that is fragile, that can be lost. Those two things go together in any movement of care. So that's the first sort of clarificatory thing. The second thing, though, once you grasp that logic, which is really the logic of self-maintenance, that the most primitive form of that logic is in the unique form of any living being, which, unlike a rock or a chair that is not living, can't just exist, but always has to maintain itself. It has to be engaged in the activity of self-maintenance. It's a very important aspect of the argument in the book. And the idea is that that activity of self-maintenance is animated from within by the risk of death, because otherwise there would be no purpose to the activity of maintaining yourself. That's why living beings, not just as a matter of empirical fact or evolution, but necessarily are mortal. Now, so what that means in relation to the second half of your question is that you know, there's great imprecision in how we use terms like immortality and so on. Even if we can succeed, and this is not the important point, I don't think empirically we are as far along as you suggest, but even if we were, it wouldn't make a difference, because any intelligible form of life to which you're committed, you know, is always going to depend on some form of self-maintenance. You know, and all of these scenarios, it's like, you know, there are material forms of support that you have to sustain, etc. So all of those movements are about like prolonging something that always can be lost. And mortality here doesn't mean that like, oh, you can only live for 90 years, or that there's a set moment when you're going to die. Mortality here means your death is possible at every moment, and that's why you always have to maintain your life. You know, whatever you're committed to is something that can fall apart, and therefore something that you always have to maintain. And that would be true even if we make our substrate much more resilient. You know, but whatever program you upload it to, the program is going to have to run, and it can fail. And that's, you know, that's not just a bug; it's a feature.
Nice. This lady here, yeah, just yeah.
This is a question that I feel you've answered sort of indirectly, but I'd like to just make it explicit.
Great.
I've understood your arguments about how finitude can give our life value, but how exactly does it make us free?
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. So again, I don't want to be pedantic, but let me just say again, it's very important that it's not simply that finitude gives our life value. It's that like only for a finite being can there be a question of what is valuable or not valuable, what is worth doing and not worth doing. That's really the question. So it's like finitude opens that very capacity of caring, but that is what can make life feel flourishing and meaningful, but also unbearable and meaningless. You know, it's just that like that things can be at stake requires that you're a finite being who have to sustain yourself in some way. Now, the way that's linked to finitude, to freedom, sorry. The way that's linked to freedom is because to be a free being in the sense that's relevant for the book, to be a spiritually free being, is to have the ability to ask yourself what you ought to do with your time, what is worth doing, and you know, that question, which say what you ought to prioritize, what is significant rather than insignificant, making all of those distinctions and holding yourself to them. And that's only possible because you understand in practice that you have to make priorities, that you have to make those distinctions, and that's only intelligible if you take yourself to have a finite time to live. You know, if you really believed you had infinite time, nothing you do, even if you devoted yourself for 2 million years to something, it wouldn't really express any priority of yours, because you're not expending any time. You have infinite time. which is why like an infinite God, etc., couldn't express those sorts of priorities. Just as like part of like when you perceive someone else making you a priority, part of what's really moving if someone like decides to like share their life with you is precisely because you understand, they understand that you don't have infinite time, that you really make this person a priority, that you're devoting part of your precious time to this person, and if you didn't understand yourself as fine, you couldn't express in practice that sort of devotion to something, and that sort of devotion is necessary to also like be free and be engaged in the question of like what you ought to do, and that's